The Chicago Urban League recently released a report on the state of Black Chicago, and simply put, the state is not great. What challenges are impacting Chicago's Black residents, and are there solutions that can be pursued? I'm Andrea Zopp. This is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. We'll get into it all right after this short break.
I'm Jamira Alexander, inviting you to join me for the series premiere of Public Narratives, A Word, with my very special guest, Arkie Adams, former artistic director and cultural strategist for Looking Glass Theater, and Takuma Roback, managing editor of the Chicago Defender. Join the conversation Thursday, September 14th at 7 p.m. on cable channel 19 and streaming on cantv.org and the CanTV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
In response to vast disparities in resources and opportunities, many Black residents, regardless of income level, have left Chicago in the last decade in search of more affordable housing, higher performing schools, and safer spaces, according to data analysis from the Chicago Urban League's 2023 State of Black Chicago report. Joining me to discuss these trends and other key findings from the report is the president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League, my dear colleague and friend, Karen Freeman-Wilson. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today,
I am
Andy.
so happy to see you and happy to have a chance to have this important conversation. So let's talk about the research, the really amazing research department, and this year's 2023 State of Black Chicago report. You want to give us some of the major themes of the report?
Absolutely. So the themes of the report were, one, that the vast majority of Black Chicagoans are concentrated in 27 neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And that's significant because it not only speaks to the hyper-segregation that we still experience as a community, but it also points to the opportunity for solutions. Right. And, you know, that's really what I've chosen to focus on. It talks about the exodus, which you referenced in your introduction. There has been an exodus of Black Chicagoans because of the need for better education, for safer spaces, but also because of greater opportunity that we've seen in either suburban communities or in other states altogether. And then we have seen, because of the impact of COVID, a larger concentration of unemployment, a larger concentration of not owning homes, so being renters and not homeowners, and a greater concentration of wealth reduction, which is something that we're all concerned about.
So many things in there that I'd love to take a minute and unpack. Let's start with the concept of segregation. People talk a lot about how segregated Chicago is and the challenges that presents. Several years ago, the Metropolitan Planning Committee released a report on the costs of segregation to the economy here. You know, I think for me, when I think about it, I think, you know, it's not like we're going to solve that tomorrow, right? And I think should be a push to increase access and opportunity to other areas, which is really what how segregation happened. But I want to talk to what you said about solutions. So let's talk a little bit about tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about it in terms of solutions, and how the fact that we're concentrated is enabling for perhaps some opportunities for improvement.
Right. So often when people think about the cost of segregation, they think about how the lack of opportunities and the lack of access impact residents. But we often think about it, if people are concentrated, then that provides an opportunity to really concentrate solutions. Mm-hmm. So if there are organizations working in Inglewood, we can all work together in Inglewood to provide opportunities for residents who live there. And so if in fact you see 77 neighborhoods and you know that Black Chicagoans in 27 of those 77 neighborhoods make up more than 80% of the residents, why not work together to provide entrepreneurship opportunities, to provide workforce development opportunities, to enhance educational opportunities in those 27 neighborhoods? Because then you have an opportunity to impact over a significant number of Chicagoans, because they have such a high concentration of Black Chicagoans. I think that's really one of the major takeaways of the report as we look and think about solutions.
How do we get policymakers to rethink how they're investing those resources and to move to that point, to really to leverage, if you will, the segregation to a positive benefit?
I think it's important as we talk to policymakers, as we talk to corporate entities who want to support solutions in the city, even as we think about governmental entities, to look at the data. What does the data say? And if we allow the data to drive our solutions, then there's a real opportunity to manage change and to improve the lot, to improve what Black Chicagoans experience.
Before we run out of time, any other main points that you want to make sure that our viewers note about the report?
The thing that I really want people to focus on is the importance of looking towards solutions and of us working together to achieve those solutions. There are a lot of great organizations that are working to improve the current state of Black Chicago, but unless we work together and unless we do it in concert, it doesn't mean that you have to cede your program or that you have to subordinate your program to any one organization. It simply means that we have to communicate, that we have to work together, and that we have to work with others, whether it's governmental entities, whether it's others that are in this space, to ensure that we're cooperating.
Karen, you're doing such great things, and I'm so happy to have you as my friend and to see all the wonderful things you're doing at the Chicago Urban League. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'd be remiss if I didn't say it's an honor to follow in your footsteps at the League.
Thank you, my friend. Yes. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Darius Hillman. Joining me on the next edition of In the Arena, artist, activist, and serial entrepreneur Jeremy Hodges. Take a look.
I'm trying to get rid of all the phobias and all the isms: racism, sexism, fatopia, transphobia, homophobia. I want to get rid of it all.
Join the conversation Tuesday, September 19th at 7 o'clock on CAN TV Cable Channel 19 and streaming on cantv.org and the CAN TV Plus app.
Karen and I scratched the surface of the issues raised in the Chicago Urban League's State of Black Chicago report. But joining me now to do a deeper dive are three journalists who cover the issues we described every single day. Joining me now to share their perspective on the report are Adora Namigadde, reporter WBEZ, Carlos Ballesteros, reporter Injustice Watch, and Matthew Harvey, publisher We Home magazine. Welcome, and let's just jump right into the report. So give me your first thoughts. I'll start with you, Adora. What was your first immediate reaction when you saw the report?
My immediate reaction was, it's devastating information, but then also sadly not new information in terms of Black people are always doing worse than other demographics, unfortunately, in the city and nationally. So it's just tough to see, though, all the numbers in all these different topics: education, home ownership rates, incarceration rates, everything. And I just want to see improvements.
Yeah. Carlos, how about you?
Yeah, equally. I mean, it's unsurprising, but I think it's still important for us to get as specific as we can when it comes to inequities in the city. And I think reports like these help us tailor the solutions a bit better.
Yeah. Matthew, how about you?
My first thought was definitely, I hope this gets heard. I think a lot of times we get reports like this, we've all looked at them as journalists. And the unfortunate truth is that rarely do the people that actually vote, that make the difference in these types of issues, get to really read them and understand them. So yeah, I would just always hope that these types of things get heard by people.
Right. Well, you all cover issues that impact Chicagoans generally, but specifically Black Chicagoans. The report talked about Black Chicagoans as struggling to thrive, right, and having real challenges on thrive. Do you, when you actually talk to and interview residents, do you feel that as well? And how does it come through when you actually talk to people? Matthew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's definitely felt. It's definitely something that it's as simple as where you're going to speak to these people. Like, these are the areas that are listed in the report. These are Auburn, Gresham, and Inglewood. And I'm from Uptown, so I did a lot of reporting there. And so there's a lot of, you do feel it, because these people will ask you questions that are really directly addressing the fact that they don't have a job, or like, will this affect, like, will what I'm saying now get heard by the aldermen? And will they make a decision that is in my best interest? So it's very present in people. This isn't secrets,
Carlos, how about you? What do you see when you talk to people, or hear when you talk to people?
Despite like the kind of like big picture numbers about the economy being fine and like inflation coming down, like that's not really translating for a lot of working people on the ground, particularly when you see rents go up, grocery bills go up, and things not improving. So I think there is a lot of anxiety, which I think kind of jumps out for me from this report. I think it's like a lot of alarm bells, and I think people hear them every day, and it's manifests in a lot of ways too that are not very healthy. So it's tough. I think people might not know like the exact percentages and the exact figures, but they definitely feel them.
One of the other things, though, that the report observed is that, and I think this is important when we think about the fact that change if it comes, it's coming so slowly or incrementally, and that is that oftentimes people are, when they're thinking about addressing change, are thinking about the outcomes of some of the challenges and not thinking about the causes and doing the root causes. That we don't address root cause enough. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
I think I also resonated with that, or that resonated with me in the report as well. I think when I think of root causes, and then when I think of the folks that I've spoken to, and even just my own experience looking for an apartment recently, is I think one of the larger issues we need to tackle, root issues, is housing and the availability of housing. I think the report highlights how Black households are much more likely to be renters than homeowners, and I think while it is important to increase the number of Black homeowners in the city, I think these numbers indicate that what people need the most right now is accessible rental units that are at a price point that makes sense for them. And unfortunately, for the last 20 years, since like the Chicago Housing Authority's plan for transformation, when we destroyed all the public housing we had with the promise of rebuilding it, that never really happened. I think we're seeing the effects now, where people can't afford to rent the units that are available, and they have no real alternatives but whatever is in the private market. And so I think when it comes to housing, I think as a root cause, I really do think we need more public housing. And I think we need it immediately. And I think the feds need to step in. And the city too, because like you look at Englewood, for example, and I'm gonna shout out a story my former colleague Manny Ramos wrote a few years ago, where the city destroyed like 1,000 houses between like 2008 and 2018. And the city owns 75% of those buildings. Now when you go through Englewood, it's completely desolated, and large areas of it are just completely wiped off the map. And there was no one thinking of like turning these housing units into housing again, or at least like turning them into public housing or some other forms of housing, as opposed to destroying it, which is destroying the neighborhood itself. So I really do think housing is the deepest rooted issue that we need to fix at the moment.
What about you?
These root causes they're often so connected, and I think that when you go straight to the results, that's why you get these solutions that don't work, because they almost separate the issues. It's like, You know, we're focused on crime in terms of the criminal doing the activity, and so that's a completely separate issue than what's going on in a hospital. You know, but in reality, the person that ends up a criminal is very likely from the same background of somebody who has a heart attack at 36. You know, like these types of things are very connected, but we don't do enough of connecting those dots when we start from the end.
Right.
You know?
That makes sense, and also it makes me think what you were saying with housing. You were talking about how we need more properties to rent, right? And also I was thinking with home ownership, it's a hard system to navigate, and you often need someone to really guide you through it. Like I just bought a condo this time last year, and if I didn't have my parents to help me and to just like kind of walk me through the process, I don't know that I could have done it. It was very overwhelming in many ways, and I had to learn a lot of new information in order to navigate it.
Right, and I think, and if you think about it, if you're again talking about root causes, if you think about the fact that many people in some of these communities have never don't know anybody who's ever bought a home or owned a home
Right.
or been through the process. Plus, and then the report does detail this, the costs are, you know, the system is set up in a way that it costs more. Your house gets appraised for less, your mortgage is going to cost more. So there's some real challenges. Yeah. Any thoughts on, you know, when we're talking about housing, you talked about public housing. I think there is a push in the city for more affordable housing. Yeah. Other thoughts or solutions that we can address? Because I think you're right, housing is critically important.
Yeah, I think that it starts from exactly that, getting people public housing, but also understanding that housing doesn't end with just housing. I think that often we think that if we get public housing that, like, you know, that's, you know, you put people in a place to live and that's it. But the reality is that people need mental health support. People need just physical health support. Like, people need access to education. You could put someone in a house, but if that house is in a place where the schools are underfunded, then those kids raised in that home are still going to end up in, you know, perpetuating that cycle. And go ahead.
I was just saying, Matt, I think you're definitely absolutely right. It has to be like everything at once. Yeah. Because everything at once is failing. And I think patchwork solutions definitely don't work anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we do need to build housing, especially in places like Englewood that have been destroyed, and other places like it where demolitions have completely wrecked the Black community in Chicago.
Yeah.
I think it's time to invest in building some housing.
I also think it's important to funnel people into home ownership, just because that's a main way that people build wealth in this country, and wealth that they can pass down to different generations. So it's like the public housing needs to be built. I definitely agree. But then we also have to be thinking of, how do we get people out of this? How do we get people into properties that they own and have control over and ownership over, so that they can pass on that wealth to their children?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that idea of wealth building and really thinking about wealth generation really ties again also into something else in the report around employment and workforce and the kinds of jobs that people can get, right? So we talk a lot about you know, raising the minimum wage, and we've done that, and that's great, but you know, we all know that the minimum wage is not sustaining it's not sustaining income, right? And so one of the things Karen talked about earlier was about more place-based focus on workforce development and some of the efforts that have been done to increase and create jobs, good paying jobs at the community level. I don't know, have you reported on that or thought about that, or see that as a possible positive solution, something like the Discover Call Center or the Blue Cross Blue Shield service center, healthcare service center on the edge of Roseland?
Yeah, there's some, when I was reporting for the tribe, I got the opportunity to talk to a lot of CPS students about this issue exactly. And that was one of my favorite things, was talking to the students to get their perspective on like what they felt they should be learning in school. And what you find is that so many of these students are so much more interested in things that are practical, things that are, you know, that they could even start right out of high school. Like, you know, there are kids that are interested in engineering and plumbing and things like that are completely, you don't need to go to school, like go to a 4-year college to do these things. You could do this with a year extra as an apprentice. somewhere. And in the past, this was something that was completely normal. It was typical for a high school to offer certain pathways toward apprenticeship as a carpenter, as a plumber, and things like that. And now there just feels like this very direct pipeline where you have to go to a college or a university after you're finished with high school. And unfortunately, because these high schools are so underfunded, those kids aren't prepared to all the time to go to a four-year university. I knew I wasn't prepared when I first went. I had no idea what I was getting into. But because I went to a selective enrollment school with Young, shout out Dolphins, I went to Whitney Young, and their whole thing was you have to go to a college. And if I'd have known better, I probably would have gone to a community college instead of a four-year university, or maybe even done an apprenticeship somewhere. And those avenues are just being completely wiped out and erased. There's just no education tilted towards those things.
I agree totally. And I think one thing that helps me think of this issue is like there's not a lack of work to be done, there's a lack of funding behind it. So if you think of communities across the city that need things like plumbers, roofers, people building homes, people fixing streets, people doing, like there's all this need but not enough money behind it to make it happen. So I think there's definitely a large possibility of keeping people working within their communities. And I also think one of the other kind of root issues that I think should be addressed is access to transit and like connecting the city in ways that have been that hasn't been done so before, particularly the predominantly black areas of the city that have been cut off from public transit, which makes it even harder to find a job, get to a job, and increases commute times, which gives everyone a headache. And just, you know, I think all of these things coming together, I think, will improve the economic stimulation of these areas of the city.
So what else struck you? The other thing I noticed in the report, because we're spending so much time as we're watching all these horrible weather things and environmental things happen all over the country, was the touch on environmental health and the impact on communities. I know. What did you see something there? What did you think about that?
That stuck out to me too, because there's a section on health as well, and those two things were very interrelated, and it's just really devastating to see that like hypertension and obesity are twice as high in the black community versus in white communities in Chicago. We're more exposed to bad air as black people in the city, and it's just many more hurdles to climb to get to the same place that everyone else wants to be at, just have a happy, stable life.
Yeah, and it's interesting how those things often get minimized. Those things often get like kind of overlooked, but you know, when you have asthma or you have hypertension or anything like that, like you're going to the doctor more. Going to the doctor more means you're going to work less. You mean that means your boss could penalize you for that.
And how are you going to pay those bills?
Yeah, how are you going to pay those bills? I mean, even bringing up the fact that the people in the south and west side of the city, because there's lack of transit, there are more people that have to have cars, and so. The reality is that there's, more pollution from vehicles, and the fact that itself, not to mention that the car itself is more of a, drain from your pockets. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like when it comes to health, it's like we act like it's often kind of perceived in a way that like, well, that's your issue. Your health is your issue. But the reality is this air that we're breathing is all of us are contributing to it. These grocery stores are not something that I can't choose to just make a grocery store in my neighborhood, no more than I can choose to make this soil healthy to grow a garden in. So, yeah.
Carlos?
The health disparity stuff is really depressing because it's from cradle to the grave when it comes to the stats when it relates to the black community. I mean, just one of the graphs here in the report, like 7 times as many black children have lead poisoning than white children in the city. I mean, come on. That would be an absolute like pandemonium if those stats were flipped. Things would be done differently. Yeah. I think it's easy to assume that the pipes would be replaced a lot quicker than they are now. It's just it's like decades and decades of disinvestment and poisoning that are just not being addressed quickly enough. and I think on the flip side, when it comes to older adults, which is something I've been focusing on more recently in my work. The disparities among older adults are truly enraging. My colleague David Jackson recently wrote a story about how Black older adults are much more likely to be financially exploited than anyone else in the city, particularly like Black middle class older adults who are getting swindled for their savings and all the money that they've been able to rack up over the years. And it's a combination of things, but it's also a reflection of the fact that the people who are supposed to protect older adults, but the police and other like adult protective services, don't investigate these cases at all, for the most part. So it's the health disparities and are very depressing. And I think probably a call to action that is like very loud. I mean, it's hard to ignore these stats, but.
So I think that's a really important point for us to, and I want to try and wrap up on a little bit of a more, because because the report is sobering, right? And so I want to wrap up on a little bit more. I think each of you touched on some possible solutions. Carlos, you talked about public housing. You talked about more skills-based education programming for students. Anything else that we think, if we were talking to Mayor Johnson, what would we want to say to him? What else would we want to say to him for him to focus on, Adora?
I liked the solution that was noted in the report about like ACT, SAT prep classes, because that just helps like build a bridge to these endpoints that we're trying to bring people to. So anything that helps people take these exams, I support.
Absolutely.
Education is the biggest one. I think that all of this stuff, the biggest barrier is people knowing about it. Because what happens most often is that when you put a report like this in front of somebody, it kind of does radicalize them. Even if it's just a tiny amount, they're making decisions differently, or they have a different outlook on the world around them. And like that education is one of the biggest separators between any of this happening and not.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, thank you. I want to thank all three of you for being here, for sharing, for highlighting this report. The report is available on the Chicago Urban League's website. And so I encourage you, everyone, as Matt said, if you read and you're educated, you will learn and hopefully you'll become more engaged as a citizen here. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. And I'll be right back with my closing thoughts.
I'm Anna Valencia, one of your hosts for Joy in the Breakthrough. On our next episode, Con and I will discuss being caregivers. Caregiving is one of the greatest gifts life can give, and it also can be one of the most stressful.
In the caregiving role, it is how do we define that for ourselves? Because we can also become the crusader, and my goal was not to be the martyr.
Tune in this Monday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org, and now available on the new CAN TV Plus app.
Having had the privilege of serving as its president and CEO for 6 years, the Chicago Urban League is an organization that's very near and dear to my heart. The issues and themes amplified in the State of Black Chicago report will continue to impact the collective success of Chicago and the region until we insist on redress. While much progress has been made, significant work remains. It's my sincere hope that conversations like the one we had tonight will help to propel the narrative and drive the important work forward in measurable, sustainable ways for a large and important group of Chicagoans. In the end, our success or failure to address the issues impacting 1/3 of the city's population impacts us all. Until next week, be well and well informed.